How are you doing?
Doing well.
How's it in Alabama?
Man,
Is it
it's
hot?
wild down here, man. We have headlines like, like every other city with headlines right now. So it's like a real tense situation happening in Alabama around a young lady named Kendra Chapman.
Hmm.
Um, she was arrested on
You know
one of
what,
the.
Al? Can I just say hello here and
Yeah,
get
just say hello.
Valerie in, and then we will go right to what you're talking about here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
that
mean,
sounds
if
fine.
y'all want to,
Yeah,
we can save it for the
it
end.
seems to need to.
Yeah, it's
It's,
terrible. It's a terrible. Yeah.
um, Valerie, we're waiting for you. If you can get in here, that'd be great. If not, maybe we'll start anyhow. Mm. Yep, looks like she's having some difficulties. We'll get started and she'll join us, I hope. Um, Welcome to Teachers Teaching Teachers. It is July 22nd, 2015, and we are continuing. Every once in a while, we get together and talk about Black Lives Matter, what's going on in the United States and elsewhere, I guess, but and how it's affecting our curriculum. Keisha Blain said that she could join us tonight, and so we grabbed her because she is one of 3 or 4 other people, professors, I think all of you, maybe you're writers, who put together the Charleston syllabus. And we want to hear about that and what you've learned from doing that, and how we might use it, and whatever else comes up. We are joined here tonight by Chris Rogers. Do you want to say hello?
Hi, everybody.
And where
I'm
you're
Chris
from
Rogers.
and what you do a little bit.
Oh, yeah, I'm Chris Rogers. I'm over in Philly. Ooh, excuse me. I do media technology and an English course and a college course I got to tell you about in safety and justice in the urban context.
Now, is that your title?
No. I got to come up with something cooler than that. I don't know what it's going to be, but I think that's what's up there right now.
Yeah, well, at the end of last week's show, you shared with us your question, and
Oh, yeah.
It's been bugging me. We got to get back to that.
Yeah.
Let's get another introduction to.
Yeah.
So welcome, Chris. Great. And Al, welcome.
Hi, Elliott. I'm a 5th grade teacher in Hoover, Alabama, very near Birmingham. Um, I'm a tech enthusiast. I host I guess it's an overdue Monday's Eve discussion, which is an educational discussion hangout that, of course, I have a back to school show, so hopefully I can get some people on there. But yeah,
When is that?
I hadn't set a date yet. So maybe the week after next. I don't know.
So
But I
did you
really
say,
want to.
what grade did you say?
I teach 5th grade this year, and this year I'll be focusing on literacy. Like this year, we're departmentalizing at my school, and
I thought you
so
said 10th. I thought it
no,
was 5th
fifth
grade.
grade.
Okay, okay, cool.
But yeah, so cool.
Thank you. And Michael, welcome.
Hi everyone. I teach English at a well, technically a suburban high school in Los Angeles County, but our population is very much and our context is very much urban setting. Our students are 97% Latino. Majority are children of immigrants, if not immigrants themselves. A lot of undocumented students. We have, a lot of students whose families don't have a lot of formal education, and we're also the lowest income neighborhood in our working class suburban city. So I teach there and love my community, and I'm looking for ways to be a better teacher for that community. And specifically, I advise the journalism class, which is kind of like the dessert at the end of my teaching day. I've taught 9th and 12th grade English, but this year I'm very excited and also terrified because I'm going to be teaching U.S. history for the first time. It's a junior class in our school. So I'm looking for ideas for how to bring this kind of conversation about social justice and racism into my English classes, but also, into my U.S. history class. I'll be teaching 2 of those. So I'm mainly here to listen and just kind of soak in as many ideas as I can.
I'm not going to let you do that.
Oh no, I'm gonna do my best just to shut up and take notes.
But I think it's worth mentioning also that you've been doing some work in collecting other people's ideas around inquiry, and kind of keeping students at the center of their inquiries, if that's a way to say it.
Right.
This summer as well. So bringing together that social justice focus and inquiries is one of the things we all work on, I think. Go ahead. Did you want to?
I was just going to say that it's part of a summer project from the National Writing Project called CLMOOC, the Connected Learning, massively open online collaboration. And I've been trying to collect is a good word, some of the ideas that people have for inquiry in general. And what's really come out of the discussions is that teachers want ways to center their students' interests and their students' needs and make classrooms more democratic, for lack of a better term. In other words, instead of imposing a pacing plan and standards and all sorts of outcomes that are determined from outside the school without student participation, looking at ways that we can engage our students in thinking about what they care about and providing a forum and resources and a space for them to learn how to pursue their interests a little bit with a little bit more skill. So that's kind of what I've been thinking a lot about, and obviously
great context. Thanks. Thank you.
To it.
And Valerie Burton from near New Orleans is trying to join us. She pops in and out. I'm not sure what the issue is there, but hopefully she'll be able to join us as well. And Marcia Chatelain, I'm not sure, who started FergusonSyllabus and has been curating there for almost a year now. Is hoping to join us as well. She might be a little bit late, she said, and was looking forward to meet you. Keisha, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more and get us into CharlestonSyllabus? You're a college professor. Welcome to all these K-12 teachers here tonight.
Well, first, thank you so much for your invitation. I'm so glad I was able to join. And so I am currently an assistant professor of history at the University of Iowa, and I teach 20th century U.S. history, African American history, sort of African diaspora history, and I spent the last year at Penn State as a postdoctoral research fellow, finishing up revisions for my book, which, interestingly enough, is not on racial violence per se, but the book is about Black nationalist women's political activism in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and there's so many connections to be sure. But to talk about the CharlestonSyllabus, really the day after the shooting, I was on Twitter, like so many other people, talking about what happened, really frustrated about the kinds of conversations that were taking place, particularly in the media. And Chad Williams at the time, he was tweeting saying something like, we really need a CharlestonSyllabus. I liked the idea. We immediately started communicating, and Keisha Williams, who's a historian, who's very active on Twitter, she, along with a group of other historians, started tweeting out asking for suggestions. And so really what I wanted to do immediately was to compile a list, because I was concerned that we would take this moment, we would start tweeting out suggestions for books and articles, and it would all be great, and then it would sort of be gone in an instant. And so immediately I thought, okay, well, let me try to collect this information, organize it into a list. And as I've said, as I explained elsewhere, it just became overwhelming because so many people started tweeting out suggestions. And so a couple of librarians, sent me messages on Twitter and offered to help. put this list together. And so now, what's really exciting is you could search Charleston syllabus on Google and come up with the actual list. And to be clear, we couldn't possibly include every single suggestion that came in, but the list certainly represents so many of the works that were suggested, and works on racial violence, works on slavery, works on global white supremacy, just a range of different topics. And Michael was talking earlier about just the need to engage students, and this is something that we were concerned about too. Is how do we take this particular painful moment, and how can we turn it into really a teaching moment? And for us, the Charleston syllabus, what's exciting about it is it represents, for one thing, a range of different fields. And so,
Keisha, could we interrupt you as you go here?
Yes, feel free.
Okay, so let me push back. I don't like that word always, but let me ask a question that might be lingering in some people's minds, and certainly was in mine. We didn't jump on Charleston and the tragedy there right away on TTT, and let me just, I didn't. Because there's a certain amount of I don't know, like yet again another one,
Right.
So you must have heard that question before. How now we're going from Ferguson syllabus to Charleston syllabus. What's that about, or what did you think about that?
Well, it's interesting because when we started tweeting out, asking for suggestions for the syllabus. I can say certainly, and I think I would agree, we did not imagine that the response would be what it was. And largely because of this point that you raised, because of course, since the Charleston syllabus, there have been a number of different syllabi. I think yesterday someone started tweeting, "Say her name syllabus," right, and coming out of what has happened recently in Texas with Sandra Bland, and so. There certainly has been a trend of coming up with syllabi regarding different topics, and so we thought that, well, at the very least, if people are interested in having this national conversational race that we've been talking about for so long, then let's at least throw out some really good books and articles and suggested readings for everyone to at least be able to have an informed conversation.
And just to open up my question, and then see if others want to jump in on this. It's also true that each of these events have unique histories and important differences. All right. So, and I guess your syllabus would capture some of that. Is that fair to say?
Yes. In fact, one of the first sections that I started putting together on the site was a section on the history of Black history, particularly in Charleston, in South Carolina broadly, and so we were concerned about making sure we would have texts that would help people better understand the history, right? We now of course people understand that, well, for starters, what took place cannot just be thought of as a sort of isolated event. We need to see this particular event, as painful as it was, as really a part of a long history, right? Part of a long and painful history. And Kadida Williams and others have written about this. We have to acknowledge that there are centuries of violence, right? And so, Black people in this country have been subjected to all forms of, racial violence for centuries, and so it's important to consider what took place in Charleston within that longer history, and to also understand that, of course, what took place in this church setting was also not unique in any way, because, of course, churches have been targeted for quite some time. So, certainly we had to contextualize it, to be mindful of the context, and the readings reflect that.
I think part of the
Go ahead, Al. Yeah. Just so we know who's talking.
If I could just jump in on the,
please.
I guess specifically on the question of there being like multiple syllabi. You got the Charleston, Ferguson. I'm sure it's going to be a Homewood one because of what's going on in Birmingham tomorrow. But I think it's important to understand how all of these things are uniquely the same, right? And they are part of a bigger same, right? Like a lot of times when we get into the minutia of the details, and I'm not trying to minimalize the detail and the context, there is a sameness that I think is what keeps getting ignored, right? Like they call it the news. Like I was thinking about it, like we need to come up with something else because it encourages the idea of what's happening right now is the most important thing, as if it is detached from what has already happened, right? Like there were certain systems set up to govern a society, and after those systems are set up, it matters now who holds the positions of those systems, right? Like if you were designed to be this cog in this wheel, as long as this cog has a person turning it, then the machine is going to do what it was set up to do. So a lot of the things that we are seeing more of now, hearing about them more of now, like have never not existed, right? And so to me, the importance of history specifically, like it's weird, like it's almost like you could play a game now, and not to trivialize it, but you can read like something that's happening and then say now or then, and just ask your students to pick out the decade and see how many times they get it right or wrong. Just understand within the context, there's never been a period of time of American history where, you know, black or brown people didn't have stories to share like this that had certain commonalities, right? I don't know how many people did y'all know that in a fraternity or a sorority, but if you know anybody in a fraternity or a sorority, it's almost like they have similar characteristics in certain settings, right? Like if you get members of the same Greek fraternity together, they can be generationally separated. They will have certain characteristics that are the same. And I think one of the problems that we keep ignoring in history is the fraternal nature of police departments and their original relationship with people of color and this country. That organization has a characteristic, has a personality that members of it can't help but to obtain. So a lot of the problems that we're looking at, I think because we look at them so uniquely and so individually, we kind of can't see the forest for the trees on the issue, which I think is the importance of having multiple syllabus so that we can see, hey, look at the similarities of a Ferguson, of a Birmingham, of a whatever, as opposed to racism is one thing and it wears a hood and it waves a KKK flag. But when you start having multiple institutions talking about the systemic nature of what white supremacy is and how it manifests itself, I think that that gives our youth a more accurate picture of what it is they're trying to even talk about.
Can you break down a little more about the headlines you're talking about and what's happening tomorrow?
I know just like in Birmingham, her name is Kendra Chapman. Okay, Kendra Chapman. Homewood is like a suburb of Birmingham, Alabama. Ironically, Birmingham. But so she was arrested. She's an 18-year-old youth.
So you weren't referring to Sandra Blain. Okay, yeah.
No, and this is see, that's what I was saying.
That's so crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So go ahead, tell the story.
Anyway, she was arrested for stealing a phone. According to AL.com, if you Google her name is Kendra Chapman. All of this comes up. This is the they will have something that was probably published today, right? So it's a recent story. Long story short, she was arrested. The same day she was arrested, the police department released said that she hung herself with a bed sheet in like an hour's time after she's arrested. Now, according to the article, she had a run-in with the police like a couple of times, maybe this week. Like she tried to kick out a patrol car window. Then the article mentioned that they dealt with her, and I don't even know what dealt with her mean, but that's just how they wrote it up. And then she was arrested, and then they said she hung herself with a bed sheet. Well, they also quote the mother of her saying in the article that what the police is saying has happened didn't happen. And if you just keep looking up, like they're just conflicting stories. And this is official hearsay at this point, the thing I'm about to say, but some of the protesters in Birmingham were arrested. So there were protesters here that were arrested, but they actually saw the insides of the jail. And so when they came out, they had a couple of choice ways to describe the insides of the jail, how it's cameras everywhere, how one of them had snuck a cell phone in, but because security is so tight, they found out and came and got it, so how it would seem unlikely that you would even be able to have a bed sheet and hang yourself. It just seemed an awful lot like just misstatements. The timetable that when the parents said that they found out, the mother said she found out her daughter was dead, and it was just a lot of inconsistencies with the story. But that's what's going on right now. At this point, the latest on it is the district attorney has all the information, and the district attorney says he can't get in touch with the family, and he doesn't think that it's right to release the information to the public before he releases it to the family. And so in Birmingham, that's what we're waiting on, or that's what we're looking at, or that's what happened after. I think the next day after Sandra Bland became talked about.
Mhm.
So I'm just waiting for others to jump in here. Don't.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I wanted to give that story its own sort of time and moment. Just reflecting on it. I saw the name on Twitter, but I didn't hear that much of the story. It sounds crazy. One of the things that I did want to jump off you, Al, and kind of throw it back to Dr. Blain is about the news, right? The idea that is new, the idea that is different, right? And going back to Mike, I know Mike, one of his favorite people was Eduardo Galeano. He has this whole thing about we suffer from amnesia, we suffer from forgetting, and I think it's really interesting to me is when I think about sort of like the times and the black movements that have happened. There's always been a reference to a lot of the same readings, a lot of the same scholars, people who have talked about this story and the sameness and the similarities and the distinct differences over periods of years and years, and somehow the forgetting always occurs, so that we need these new interventions and these constant interventions to say, no, you need to remember this history and remember that history. And with that being for me, I know one of those places is seeing how the depth of the academy in these stories, and then the relative just non understanding in teacher education and history in the K-12 space of how isn't these stories, these histories talked about. And when you were saying about your book about internationalism, I we hear about Paul Robeson, right? But Paul Robeson's wife was also a part of that, right? And I just watched a video from Barbara Ramsey on when she was talking about it. So it's we need how can we begin to reconnect these histories, reconnect these time periods, and reconnect ourselves that the forgetting doesn't happen. So I guess that's what I'm interested in you, Dr. Blain, about how do we get past that divide? Because JSTOR, you need a paywall for everything, and this, that, and the third.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is something that we were thinking about, and with the Charleston shooting, in so many ways it was, it was like an opening, right? Because it's so hard to think of anything positive that could come out of this difficult and painful tragedy. I think that if anything has come out of it, that we might see is a sort of, in a positive light, is the fact that some people at least, are saying, okay, perhaps it's time to have this conditional race. Perhaps it's time to acknowledge that this idea of a post-racial society is something that we imagine. Perhaps it's time to admit that, yes, we've made great progress, but we have a long way to go. And so if we acknowledge that we have a long way to go, then we need to be vigilant, and we need to be fully engaged. And to be fully engaged and to move forward, one has to know the past. One has to know the history. Of course, we say that all the time. To know where you're going, you have to know where you came from. And so I think this question of memory is a crucial one. And we saw it come up again and again with the Confederate flag debate, right? This notion that, well, we've forgotten what the flag stood for, and I think it's important for us to go back to the history and to be able to contextualize all these things within a larger history, as I said before. And so to your question of the paywall, too, and that's one of the reasons that we were excited to collaborate with librarians, because we felt like it was important to make sure that people would have access to the readings that they would need. And on the syllabus, there are links to WorldCat, which means that wherever you're located, if you click on a book or an article on the syllabus, you will be able to see the closest library to you. You don't have to pay a cent. You just need to walk out the door. and be willing to get a library card if you don't have one.
Keisha, can I just to give us a sampling of what has shown up on the syllabus so far? What are some of your most interesting finds there yourself that people have put up?
So I think, I mean, certainly, I mean, it's really amazing because I think someone tweeted a couple weeks ago that they felt like it was more a list for a comprehensive exam, than an actual syllabus because it was so long. But
as a teacher of graders, I was like, wow, where do I start here? Yeah, yeah.
Right, yeah. Right. I mean, so what I like about it is that it's so diverse, right? And so, for example, some folks have said, well, I'm just going to start with, the section on poetry, or I'll start with the section on music, or I'll start with film, or, I'll start with the readings on Charleston. So, in a way, because it is so diverse and because it is so lengthy, people who go to the list can sort of choose what interests them most in different categories. So that's been great. For me, I've just been learning just a lot more about the history, of South Carolina in particular, and Charleston, and there were books, articles tweeted out that I had never even heard of, and so it's exciting because even as someone who teach for a living, I study history and I write history, it was important for me to have exposure to all of these wonderful suggestions, and I'm now revising my course syllabus in order to reflect, just all of these great suggestions. So that's been one thing.
What course are you teaching in the fall?
So I'm actually teaching a course on race and politics, and so I'm doing a course on race and politics in 20th century America, and so I mean, of course, the connections to this particular syllabus, we're discussing so many connections, and so it's been great to be able to go back to syllabus I had drafted before the shooting, and now looking at it and realizing, okay, my students are going to walk in, they'll know what happened, they would have heard the conversations, and this is really, I mean, when I talk about it being an opening, a way to open the conversation, and of course the op-eds on the syllabus are really great for teachers at all levels to be able to integrate.
Yeah, so
I got something too, Paul.
Go ahead. No, I was just gonna say that I want to keep the focus on how have our syllabi. I mean, in K-12 we don't necessarily do a syllabi, but how has our teaching changed because of these openings? It makes me queasy to call these openings, but yeah.
But,
go ahead. Yeah.
But. Well, I guess this is sort of like contra to the point you just made. But okay. So one of the, like, my intervention right now, right? Because I have a lot of white liberals in my life who are praising Ta-Nehisi Coates to the gods right now for his book, which is awesome. It's a great book, right? But I feel like so many people are looking at it as just that, as just a retelling, just a retelling of a history, and not a confrontation of the way that we live and walk in the world on a daily basis. And it's, in the same way I feel about teacher education, the day-to-day act of teaching is I'm becoming tired of believing that you can teach something without living it first. And in so many ways, when we bring up the conversation of like race relations in America, or male-female relations in America, or gender relations, or sexuality relations in America, in so many ways we say, hey, you should read this. Well, at the same time, we haven't even confronted our own ways of acting in the world. And for me, that is the exact thing that allows these systems to continue and lives continue to be lost, because we're talking about it, but we're not acting on it. And when I think about like how to do it in the curriculum, it's almost like, yeah, I want you to look at the CharlestonSyllabus, but I don't want you to teach it to kids. I want you to read it. You should read it first, and then we could talk about what happens after you read it, and then we could talk about it with kids. Because I definitely notice, like in some ways it becomes sort of a mixed message. Like, how can someone tell me about race relations, and at the same time look at me like I'm not even a person. And
But I think part of it though is recognizing that what you're talking about even exists, right? Like, okay, so like to me, there are people that do not understand that just them living their daily go to work life is an act of racism because of the system they're a part of. Meaning, if you look at the industrial prison complex and how there are prisons that are suing governments because their population has fallen below 90%. Well, if I go to work at a prison, I am part of that system. But I just got a job. I got a good job. You know what I mean? I go to work. I'm a part of this system. So what I'm saying is,
well, yeah, but Al, you know, we're teachers too, right? So
I know. So as a teacher,
yeah,
okay, so
yeah,
coming all the way full circle back to, okay, I teach in a place. Well, this year I'm teaching literacy. So to me, my job is to teach my students how to articulate their truth, so that an audience on the other side can understand what it is they're trying to say. And I think so often we get caught up in the news and not caught up in, because it's only because we kind of respect that source. That source is more valid than the student in my class or the person with the phone or the person that was working there, because the way they articulated what they saw wasn't set up in this package that we're used to getting information. So the way it changed the way I teach in the classroom, I bring a lot more of what the students have to say to teach them how to write, as opposed to how to regurgitate what has already been said. So that's kind of like, regardless of the subject matter, I want to know your perspective of what we're studying in history. I want to know how your wheels are turning about what's going on to what you just read, right? Like, you just read this. Don't tell me the answer to fill in the blank. Tell me about the people. Like, when you hear, okay, you hear history is a bunch of dates that happen. When you hear social studies, if you just think about the social network, it's people interacting. And all throughout history, it was groups of people interacting. So what was this group of persons' interactions with this other group of persons at a time when these dates that you're trying to remember were happening? And I think that's kind of the piece. Everything you teach, kind of, especially in history or in writing, whoever wrote it, what were they trying to say? What was the context within the life? And when you write, what's going on now, and how do you incorporate who you are and how you see the world to what you're being taught? And to me, that's kind of the difference.
I mean, I totally agree, Al. I just like, and sort of like add on to that is, but I also notice in that, right, is how the distancing of we can, let's work on the next generation because our generation is already done, right? Let's talk about how to move this on to the next. You know, and I see, and when I see that, it's like, yo, you barely 40. What you talking about? You're done. You got a lot of life to left. Like, there's a lot of things we can change now. I don't know.
I guess, but the only caveat I would say to that is this is a generational problem. It didn't get like this in a year or in a 10-year span or in a 50-year span or in a 100-year plan. So when we plan to combat this in any type of way, we have to plan generationally too. So it has to be about, you know, our grandkids, our great-grand. We have to think on that scale because that's what we're up against. Like, to me, whoever can scientifically break down how racism is taught is how we should teach everything. Because that is generationally passed on. That's, you know, class system. They got it. Like, however they getting that out, that's how to teach. Right there. For real.
Al, when I read Letter to My Son, I thought of you because of your son. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the article yet, but
let me say this. I was having a conversation today with a friend of mine. She's actually a newly hired professor at UAB, and the conversation was surrounding why are we hearing so many of these black women being killed by police officers now. And, you know, she was saying when she watched the tape, she was saying that's how I would have reacted in that situation. But then I thought about how I would have reacted in that situation. Okay, I don't smoke cigarettes, but the cigarette would have went out as soon as he asked me. There's a code of conduct that is specifically talked about, period. I learned that when you start driving, okay, check this out. When the police pull you over, here's how you behave. And here's the thing. You have the right to behave how you want to, but there's a code of conduct for the survivors. You understand what I'm saying? Like, behaving a certain way becomes a survival technique in certain situations. You learn how to say yes, sir, a lot of times. You know what I mean? Like, you learn how to, when the lights come on, hear my license and registration. Like,
So,
you have
these are some of the lessons you're handing down to your son.
Absolutely,
Right?
he just took driver's ed. Yes. Listen, I'm gonna tell you a true story. Really happened right here in Bessemer. The first day I ever took my son ever in life, took my son on the road driving. We got stopped by the police. He's 15. True story.
Yeah.
That was this summer. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, that's right now. And so, don't be nervous. This could happen. Look, I told him, glad we got it over on your first day. You survived. You made it. You initiated. You can drive your best man. Let's do it. You know what I mean?
But that, I mean, that's also a function of the.
That's a function.
That's the function of lynching, right? Lynching is not
Right.
just about the person. It's about painting that picture that this could happen to you. And then so we're gonna show you. So now you think about, hey, my life chances are at stake.
Right.
So when I see these videos, and then they multiply by the day, right?
Right.
They begin to come in. I also and I see a number of people share them. I begin to think of that toll that is played. I also and the cost and the and how people
what's the cost?
Like what you were saying, there's a cost to being yourself in a moment. This is how she feels. Like, no, I don't have to put out my cigarette. I haven't watched the videos. I don't know the exact details.
I'm not saying she was wrong. I agree with you. But what I'm also saying is that is the reality.
But that is a price, right? That one you recognize that I cannot react how I want to react because I know there's a price upon it, you know. And I think in so many ways it happens in classrooms. It happens everywhere where there's a choice that you have to make, right, around how you live and the perceived code of conduct that is imposed upon you, and whether that is a the confinement of that and how that feels, right?
I just think that when you focus on it from that angle, and I think everything you said is true and I agree with, but when you focus on that, then the problem is that it's a survival technique and it shouldn't be. Like, so okay, being racist, a lot of times we talk about what black people, and that's the code of conduct. What do black people need to do? Like, people that suffer from racism are operating under the psychosis, right? Like, we don't talk about it in the terms of the mental illness that it is. You see what I'm saying? But if it is a mental illness that has existed generationally for so long, at some point you have to start talking about it as the reality because of the effects of it. Like, a lot of the symptomatic problems that we see is because this racism thing is a lot harder to get away, to get rid of. Like, you know how many laws been passed because of racism, and it's still, like, this is what I'm saying. Like, that's not how you combat it, right? That's how we fight it, but that can't be how you fight it if the results are, you know what I mean, what we have right now. Like, this society we live in was created, and there are a lot of contributing factors to it that I think get ignored when we start talking about solutions. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I want to throw it. I don't know if I'm taking over a little bit. Throw it back to Dr. Blain a little bit.
Yeah. I was going to ask the same thing.
No, because this is where I'm going with it too. Because I think Al, another part of that, right, is the whole isolationist part of it. That as Black Americans, we're the only people who feel this. And it's Dr. Blain's book in Internationalism. I really want to get into how to later times than that period, but the third world thing of how we all recognize that we are all underneath this same system, and how we begin to rebuild those connections, that we see that we're not in this fight alone, It's not something that we go through. Actually, it's way more of us that can be allied against it than there are of the oppressors. So, I mean, that's kind of my alley-oop back to Dr. Blain.
Yeah, no, this is an important point. I mean, and it's not coincidental, right, that in the case of the Charleston shooting, that the shooter ultimately, displayed, a Confederate flag, and he also displayed a Rhodesian flag. And it was important to, I mean, in so many ways, that act alone speaks to ways in which we have to think about what's taking place in the U.S. As part of really a discussion about race on a global scale. And I mean, and I think we try to capture that with the Charleston syllabus. We tried to be careful not to just focus only on selections that would be, about the experiences of people of African descent in the U.S. alone, without addressing global white supremacy and how it transpires and how it is really evident throughout the diaspora, and so this is a very important point to. I forgot your name. I'm sorry. To Al, I think it is. Yes. So it's a very important point that you're making.
So in the chat room at edtechtalk.com/TTT, Valerie, who didn't get into the hangout here, did ask a question. I'm trying to be clear with it. She wants to know, how do I fold this into my class? How do I introduce this topic? Right? How do I gather resources? Well, yeah, I mean...
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please. Go ahead. Yeah, Michael.
So I have been learning so much from this conversation, and I love Al's idea that this is 400, 500 years, and the solution has to be long-term as well. And that actually is kind of, I don't want to say reassuring, because we're talking about a really intractable problem that is literally killing people. As an educator, though, it gives me some more maybe stamina mentally to think, you know what, I can think long term, as well as what I'm going to try to do to make my classroom in 2015, 2016 more democratic. I can also think about what I might be doing in 2025. And so that's very, very helpful to have that perspective. And Chris's point that this is not just one group of people who are being oppressed, it really makes me think of, in my context, the most marginalized and vulnerable students are the students of alternate sexualities and the students who are undocumented. And so I'm just starting to think, how can I help them have more power? And one of the ideas I had as everyone was talking was the idea of maybe using oral history, kind of along the lines of what Al was saying about don't just fill in the blank. Tell me what you think about these historical events that we're studying. How does it relate to your perspective? And Al was sort of getting at the idea, I think, of not just relying on the news, not just relying on the media, not just relying on peer-reviewed scholarship, but treating all of our students as valuable sources. And I've been thinking a lot about this in the summer, about ways to get not only students to be more involved in setting their own outcomes, but how can I get the parents, especially the parents who don't speak English comfortably, who are very intimidated by coming to school, how can I tap into those parents with all their expertise and their knowledge? And I think oral history might be a way to do that, to put some value on, or that's the wrong way of putting it, to demonstrate to students that I, as the authority figure, put value on their community, as well as these other, authority sources that we're going to be studying. So I think that might be one way, although, that's complicated. I think that was one idea that was bubbling around in my head.
So one of the questions I have, though, I mean, I would echo a lot of that. One of the things you said is, how are you responding to this thing that we are studying, right? And I'm wondering if this year, and it goes back further than this year, but has shifted what we study in class too. And specifically some of the things I'm thinking about. Linda Christensen in the Oregon Writing Project has been doing some work, and I've been kind of following some of that. But looking at housing history, and certainly, you know, Ta-Nehisi Coates' other article about reparations is about housing history too, right? So, is you know, who was allowed to live where, when, and is that in the curriculum? And if it's not, shouldn't that be a key part of our curriculum that we look at? So I wondered if there are other things like that that we want to have in the curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, I got, so for me, I think with my intervention, so with the two courses I'm teaching, sort of like back to back, I'm teaching 8th graders in the English class. I'm teaching college kids in this sort of like seminar class, right? And the intervention I'm trying
to keep talking, but go ahead.
Okay. The intervention that I'm trying to make is how do, like, connecting these histories of these legacies back to bodies. I think it's important that, like, I think sometimes we like to say, like, racism is in the air. No, it's actually taken up by people who commit these actions. And it's people's fears that allow these things to continue. But sometimes when we get into the ways of telling history, of telling the story, we kind of miss the opportunity to make that connection back to people. So through the English course, we're talking about like characters, and I'm really trying to connect the whole. The phrase I've been using is like personal responsibility within systemic accountability, and trying to really draw that relationship out of like, what do we have to do to create what do we have to do as people? What do we have to commit ourselves to as people in order to create a system that reflects the world that we want to live in? And that's my intervention. I mean, you can take that into different angles. And then I guess on a fun side, I don't know, maybe I should save this for later. But yo, I really want to do a flip. So in Black History Month, February 2016, I've been talking about it a lot. I really want to do White American Violence Month, because I feel like that part of the story is never told. You always tell me about how Black people have overcome struggle, but you never talk about why were they
struggling against.
So I really want to do a flip and come at it from that angle and say, hey, let's talk about all the white heroes of violence that committed against Black people, indigenous people of this country, and let's acknowledge those, that they're part of the history too, and they count, and they were definite actors, which led to results and outcomes that lead us into today. So that's another intervention I'm thinking about doing.
It's just, so I would say this. I do think that it is important that more of the results of said violence of any era, the effect that trauma has on a people. Like, I think that is a huge part that is missing, because most of the time we talk of slavery as if a thing that happened, right? As if when slavery ended and people were free, their freedom, like the lynchings started then. You see what I'm saying? Like, they weren't lynching slaves, they were lynching after slavery. So a period of time where there was no justice, and there was that lynching period, and then you had the Jim Crow, and then you had the civil rights, and then you had the industrial prison complex. But through all of that, the treatment for people that experiences trauma like that, right? Like, if you actually, I think Joy DeGruy, I think is her name, she talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome, but the way she talks about it is not just the Black people as victims, right? Like, the white people, like, there are kids in pictures of lynchings, like the townspeople are in suits and dressed up. Like, it's not like it is not just a person in the hood or with a KKK flag, right? Like, and so when you think about the effect of children being raised that with things that were normalized, like lynchings, right? Like right now, we can hear a news story about a person that was killed by police officers, and the discussion will be about what that person had in their system, or what that person may have stolen, or what that person may, you know, how they dropped out of a school, and instantly it becomes, we are judging how much it matters to us. Like it's kind of like, well, they should have did this or they shouldn't have did that. And I think that young people understand that nuance, but a lot of times don't know how to articulate it. So their voices are not on CNN. And so what ends up happening is whoever is following the news is getting this swayed perspective of how young people feel. So then when we come in and try with young people, we automatically are talking at them and not to them, because they can't communicate with us. Because, you know what I mean? Because they don't know how. Not that they don't even want to.
So Al, can we? I want to keep it real a little bit with Valerie's question. You're going to see your fifth graders in 4 weeks. You maybe even sooner.
Yeah.
It's pretty fast, right? Because you guys.
Yeah, August. I think. I don't make me quote the date, but yeah, August, early August.
Yeah. So.
Still something.
I don't know if what was her name? Kadira? Yeah, Chapman. I don't know if that will still be in the headlines, but they will have heard of that this summer, right?
Right. Well, okay. So like, there's this app.
So,
oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's a dual. It's a couple of related questions. Do you ask them about that incident? Does that come up? And or what are some of the key moments in your literacy teaching? I mean, the other thing. While I have the floor, let me just. The other thing is the whole new Jim Crow stuff around the penal system. If that's not in our curriculum, like it feels like that needs to be there too. So those are like the housing and the penal system, like. Somehow they need to be there in kids' experience. But yeah,
this is just kind of how I look at it. You know, so I just make sure that I'm familiar with the curriculum. And to me, I look at the curriculum as minimums and not maximums or onlys, right? So, you know, I make sure that, okay, I cover the minimums, but I also need for my students at a very early age to understand the problems that we're asking them to solve.
The minimums are the requirements.
Yeah, just the requirements. Just the requirements.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a list of them. This is what you got to do. This is how you got to do it. Okay, so I do that. But it doesn't. Nowhere does it say don't teach anything else. And a lot of times my students come in with certain topics. Like I've never brought up terrorism in my classroom, but it's talked about often. Right? Like I don't talk about it, but the kids, you know, at 10 years old, 11 years old, they come to school talking about what their parents talked about. You know, or they talk about what they saw on the news or what they heard on the radio. And what I try to do is just, if that's what they want to talk about, let's have a conversation about that. Like in terms of how you want to talk about it, right? Like I'm not telling you anything. I'm asking you. There's a site called News ELA, and it's like news stories, but they actually there's an assessment component with it. So there are headlines in different genres, but ultimately there'll be something internationally that deals, and it brings the international aspect to this oppressive nature of certain governments. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of the thing. Another thing I'm doing this year, I'm going to use this Pen Pals website and just find some people, like, you know, I would love what young people in Greece are talking about right now when school starts back. You know, they're going through a hard time, and that's something I know my kids have heard about, but they can kind of, it's purposeful writing, right? They're writing to find out specific things in a genre. It could be about, you know, sports or whatever it is. So to me, within that aspect, if a news story happens in Birmingham, I'm sure someone is going to ask one of my students, what's going on down the street from you? And that may encourage my students to want to figure out and find out and write about it. So most of the time, these types of topics come up organically, and I'm just not afraid to allow them the freedom to be able to speak on it however they choose to.
Dr. Blain, jump in if you.
Yes, I was going to say, no, I mean, yeah, Al raised so many great points. I also wanted to add, too, that in addition to thinking about the kinds of conversations to have in the classroom, I think it's also important to challenge students to think about what they can do outside of the classroom. And so, whether it's saying, okay, well, what's happening in your local community, let's be clear about what's going on in the community, but what can we do? What can you do within your sphere of influence? I mean, I think that's an important question to ask. Whether you're 14 or 15 or 16, you can begin to think about ways to respond. I mean, I think the Charleston syllabus really provides an example, the Ferguson syllabus, right? Another example of the ways in which you can sort of come up with ideas that are useful in order to initiate change. And it doesn't have to be something grand. It can be it can be something, at a small scale, a couple of students coming together and saying, okay, we're tired of, the constant cycle of police brutality, for example, in our local communities. Then what can we do? What can we do, whether it is, having conversations at the community level, whether it's coming up with some type of event, I don't know, but I think it would be important for educators for all of us really, to push our students to think about responding, and coming up with strategies. So that's something I would say might be one way to respond to what's going on.
So the curating work that you're doing on here, it's ongoing. How do you expect it to continue? What are you thinking about it?
So it's actually, it's going to continue in a number of ways. So in addition to the website that we're planning to launch, and we're working on it, it'll take some time, but we're hoping that the website will be just a great place where folks could go to, again, obtain the information they need, for educators to be able to go on there to download, for example, lesson plans and all these different things that I think will be useful. We're also working on a Charleston syllabus book project, which will in many ways condense. I mean, we talked a lot about the fact that it's the syllabus is so long and there's so much to read, but this particular book will be a reader, and it's going to be for the general public. It's not going to be filled with all the academic jargon. It's going to be a reader that folks can pick up, and it will include primary sources, it'll include secondary sources, op-eds, etc., so that, again, it can be used in the classroom, but outside of the classroom as well. And so those are just two examples. We have lots of exciting ideas, and I should say we're open to more ideas too. If anyone wants to jump in of how they imagine this could really expand, not solely for the sake of the Charleston syllabus or the Ferguson syllabus, but more importantly, in order to keep these conversations going. We're excited to hear it.
I would love there to be, maybe it's there and I haven't seen it, maybe, but more direct explanation of, Al, I think, had it most clearly, like, okay, there are similarities between all these different things, like, but it's also worth seeing them in their own as well. Interesting. I had a kind of a question about the college process and all. Like, I keep wondering, you college professors, like, are you guys getting credit for this amazing work you're doing? Like, you had an answer because you came up with the book that you're coming up with, right? But I'm wondering if you guys are getting the credit you deserve out there for the curating work you're doing online too.
Yeah, for in my case, the University of Iowa has just been very supportive. My department, really the university as a whole, I've been just taken aback by the way that people have responded positively, and I think that's important. I mean, I think more and more colleges, universities are. I mean, of course, we still have to write books and articles, and we have service, but within the department, and actually, we're doing sort of public service certainly does fit in, and certainly does count for tenure requirements. And so in that way, it certainly is recognized. You know, I think when I started working on this particular project, I didn't even have in mind, that it would necessarily help me, with a tenure track, but I felt like, I had to follow my convictions. I felt like it was important to be part of this. In my mind, there was no sense to only limit my service to the classroom or to, the campus. It was important to be part of a broader conversation and to engage the public. And I've been blogging as well. So this is near and dear to me, and I'm just really happy that I happen to be at an institution that's supportive.
Because I want to acknowledge that, I think part of it was a great question, but you also have to acknowledge there's also a culture of silencing, specifically black women, when it comes to speaking up about, racism, white supremacy. It's been happening in the K-12 space as much as the academic space. And I'll also be interested in, like, how do you navigate that piece of it as well, Dr. Blain?
Yeah, no, it's this is something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. I'm always asking folks to read things that I write, because I always say, if in a moment of anger, I will not send out a tweet. That's just something that I think about, because I understand. And you're right. Over the last couple of weeks, especially, and even when folks aren't necessarily tweeting out of anger, but they're tweeting, out of historical fact, and they're still getting in serious trouble. So it's something I think about often. And for blogging in particular, I'm always kind of throwing ideas around. To my colleagues, my friends, and saying, what do you think about this? Because I think it's important to have folks around you. Okay, maybe you should, because you do have to think about the long term. And it's not to say that I'm, afraid to speak out because I'm worried about whether I'll be able to, secure tenure or not. But it's understanding that that I'm in a privileged position, really, because, and I think about the fact that, in one quick instance, one can say something that's just taken out of context, and then, then the repercussions follow, and then you're no longer able to do the work that's so crucial that you want to do. And so I just think it's all about balance, and I think it's about, working collaboratively, throwing ideas, to other folks, and being mindful that you do have to try whenever possible to explain as much as you can, even though we all know it doesn't mean that you'll be protected, and that you won't face challenges still, even when you're careful.
Yeah, and just kind of to jump in on that point, I think that's a wonderful skill set for young people dealing with literacy and literature, to learn how to write with the audience in mind. Thinking like, who is going to read this? What do I want the effect to be? Not necessarily what effect do I think this will have, but actually curtailing how you're writing it for a desired effect, and learning how to be a part of a movement. Like learning how to, if there's a movement, how to just use it as a current to kind of use that power to forward your ideas. And I think that's an empowering skill to learn how to navigate that land space too.
Al, thank you for bringing the story tonight that you brought. Are you going to be able to get involved?
Yeah, well, actually, what I'm doing tonight, I'm looking up what's going on, and I just got to write. Like, I'm a blog about. I would not tweet in anger, so I will be writing something on it. Just because it's just
you were pretty hot at the beginning. Yeah, you're hot about this. Yeah.
I just found out. Like, keep in mind, that's today. Like, that's real time. Like, that's down the street. Like, literally, I drove through Homewood today. You see what I mean? Like, that's right here. That's not a, that's Birmingham. So it's a, I know 18-year-old people. I live with a 15-year-old person. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is, the community in which I live. And then when something like that happens, it's kind of like, I don't know what the proper response is, but I know I want to be a part of it. You see what I mean? So however I can lend my voice or my talent to help positively move whatever movement is going on towards justice. I think ultimately, in this generation and the next, the idea that you can affect the world, You know what I mean? I think that's the first step, because when you start to, once you get over the acceptance, like when you get to the acceptance phase, you instantly start thinking about what can I do to help, right? And so that's kind of where I am, and that's what I hope to inspire my students to be able to, you know, with literacy and writing and reading. How do you understand what's going on from the people, and how do you get your message to the people? And that's really what it's about, as much as it is your subjects and verbs agree.
Al, thanks for so many amazing contributions here tonight. Thanks. Chris and Michael, last thoughts? We're over time here, but
I was going to say thanks for the lessons. I think I'm going to change it from White Violence Month to maybe just White History Month. I think that'll go over better in the meeting and be more historically accurate.
and you know what? Following Ta-Nehisi Coates' notion, maybe it's just, you know, American Dream Month. Never mind.
The problem with White Violence Month is you don't have enough time to fit it all in.
So, Michael, you have anything else to add?
I just wanted to add that I would love a CharlestonSyllabus book. I'm going to take Chris's idea about reading the stuff myself first.
That was a great
suggestion. I'll admit that it's a daunting list to me, with a good degree of formal education and confidence in my reading ability. So I think
I wanted to ask you earlier, where should he start? What's the first thing he should go to?
Oh yeah.
Wow. The first thing I think it would be great. I would say start with any of the op-eds. I mean, I think that's we sort of we place it right at the top. Op-eds and editorials. You know, I love those because they're just so accessible. They're much shorter. But as you begin to go through some of the op-eds, they're great because they also direct you to some of the historical readings that are longer and more in depth. But many of them are written by historians, other academics who are very much committed to social justice and very attuned to what's taking place.
So you get back to your personal inquiry then, Michael. So.
Yes, and it fits with my English class because my senior English class is designed by the Charleston University to have a rhetorical emphasis. So we do a lot of expository, we do a lot of op-ed type stuff. We actually have a unit called the Rhetoric of the Op-Ed Page, and this would perfectly the unit that we already have, cultural profiling, that deals with an article from the New York Times about stop and frisk. And I tried to sort of expand on that unit last year with minimal success, but this would be a great place for me to draw additional readings for that, as well as the idea that I can explicitly position myself as a co-learner and tell the kids, hey, I'm learning about this too. This is what I'm reading right now, and I encourage you to join me. We're going to look at this one piece together, and then I encourage you to join me in learning more about the whole syllabus. So that's very, very helpful. I'm just thinking in terms of the people I know. I consider myself sort of low-hanging fruit because I'm very interested in these topics. But for people who are a little bit more,
it's a great question.
Bit more intimidated, a book I think might be more digestible. Right. than a resource like this. So I think I love the idea of the book, and I'll just I'm looking forward. Send me the info, and I'll be like a Harry Potter fan out there to buy it at midnight.
But let's come back to that question another time. We're way over time. But like if those of us who come to this are low-hanging fruit, as you said, how does it expand to other colleagues? Is a really important question, which we're not going to address tonight. But thank you. I mean, and thank you. You like I said, we're almost 10 minutes over time here, but such rich stuff here happened at the end as well as throughout the conversation. Thank you so much. We're here every Wednesday, and we'll continue these conversations and others. broadcast over the EdTech Talk channel of the World Bridges Network that was founded by Jeff Lebo and Dave Cormier. Thank you all, especially Keisha Blain, for coming and sharing your experiences and your thoughts tonight. Good night.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you all.
Thank you for being here. This was a wonderful experience.
Yes. See ya.
Thanks for joining us.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Have a good night.